طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. You can remind me at 1:30 بحيث ان احنا we can start. So in chapter 4 we talked about user authentication and key distribution. And most of the standards that we talked about two standards, Kerberos, that uses symmetric cryptography for user authentication and key distribution. And we talked about the standard X.509, which is part of directory services that, again, it uses public cryptography for, again, user authentication and key distribution. So the standards always focus on doing both of them at the same time. The last topic in this chapter is what we call identity management. So identity management here is how your identity is maintained and managed in an enterprise. Okay? So there are so much details related to this that we need to discuss. It's not directly related to the concept of key distribution. There is no key distribution here. But maintaining your identity is an integral and crucial part for access control, exactly. So a centralized automated approach to provide, this is the identity management, to provide enterprise-wide access to resources. So we need to provide access control. So focus is defining an entity for each user, human, device, or process. So we can identify human, process, or any device using set of identifiable information which describes you, like your name and so on, and other set of attributes, associating attributes. Associating attributes, these are not to identify you per se, but something that you own, like مثلا credit card information, things like that. Okay? So, and enforcing a means by which a user can verify the identity. So once your identity is verifiable in this enterprise, you get back certain access grants. This access grant gives you access to a particular service or particular part of the system. ماشي? And when you access this part of the system, it also gives you access control. So when you access a specific service in the enterprise, you access it as a student or as administrator or as a faculty member or as engineer, finance, things like that. So each one of us will have different role to access that part of the system. Okay, so this is what we refer to as access control. So central concept is the use of single sign-on. So usually in the enterprise, you have one set of credentials, okay, which allows you to use all the services in the enterprise. So you can log on to MyQU, okay, with the same logon you can access Blackboard, right? You can even access OneDrive in Microsoft, right, using the same credentials. So this is what we call identity federation. We'll talk about this. So some of the principal elements for identity management include the authentication using the single sign-on. As we said, you can get some authentication to the system. So with the single sign-on, you can have access to all the services. But authorization here talks about access control. Talks about when you access Blackboard, you access it as a student. Okay. When you access a different service, you might take a different role in that service. Okay. So someone working in finance, if they try to access Blackboard, maybe they don't have access to Blackboard at all, or maybe they have very, very limited access to Blackboard. Okay, so this is authorization. So authorization talks about the privileges and the access control once you are authenticated to the system. Authentication gives you the grant to access. What type of access is described by authorization. واضح الفرق؟ Accounting here talks about logging access and authorizations. Accounting here talks about the fact that if you access a particular service, okay, we have to log your activities. Why? Because maybe in your email, you try to send an email and all of a sudden you have exceeded the quota that you are assigned. Okay? So accounting helps us to maintain the history of your access so that we can say, okay, so you have hit the limitation, okay, on accessing this particular resource. In order for us to do this, then we have to log all your activities. Okay? Provisioning is done by, not by us, of course. Provisioning is done by administrators. It's like ITS. ITS, they do the provisioning. Provisioning is for them to give you certain limitations on accessing particular resource. Okay? So when we do accounting to make sure that we are working according to the provisioned resources. So provisioning, I say that if you are a student, then by default, you take, let's say, 10 gigs for your email. This is provisioning. Given the actual space that we have, the capacity of all the ITS hard disk or something, then if you are a student, we give you 10 gigs. If you are a faculty member, maybe we give you 12 gigs. If you are a president, we give you 100 gigs, and so on. Okay? So this is provisioning resources. Okay? If you are a student, maybe you can allow you to have a virtual machine with particular resources on ITS system or something. Okay? Provisioning is how you plan your available resources to be given to the users. Workflow automation here specify a sequence of events based on the user role. So if you try to log on to Blackboard as a student, you will see set of screens, right? If I try to log in as a faculty member, I will see different screens, right? So when I click, I get a different screen. When you click on the same link, maybe you get a different screen. Okay, so this is what we call workflow. Workflow is a sequence of interactions that you do on the system, right?
Is it same
As
as point of view?
a point of view, yes, point of view. If you talk about the particular interactions that you do on the system, then it makes, yes, so it's the same. So this is your point of view when you try to do some interactions to the system. Okay? So when you perform a certain workflow معناها ايه? Certain sequence of events. Like for example, a workflow is for course registration. So you need to do course registration. Okay? So that's a workflow. Then as a student, I have to log on. Once I log on, I select so for example, the catalog and so on. When I select the catalog, I will see. So if I try to perform that particular workflow as a faculty member, I can't. Okay? I can get to the catalog, but I cannot have any functionality to register, مثلا. So this is what we refer to as workflow. Delegated administration, as you can imagine, in the enterprise, it's not feasible to have one single admin to everything. It's very hard, right? So we have Blackboard admin, we have network admin, we have MyQU admin, and so on. Okay, so we can delegate the administration process to different people. Password synchronization is very important. It's not maybe a very common concept. If you go to MyQU and then you try to change your password, okay, does that get replicated to all the servers, all the services, or not? Maybe yes, maybe no. So password synchronization talks about two things. There are multiple passwords, or there is single password. So there is single sign-on, which means that your password will get synchronized in all servers. Okay? So when you log on to Blackboard, when you log on to everything, it will be the same. However, this is sometimes not good from a security perspective. Because if someone hacks your password, خلاص, he gets access to everything. صح? That's very bad, right? So that's why in many organizations they use the concept of reduced sign-on. Reduced sign-on. Reduced sign-on here talks about the fact that you may have to maintain multiple passwords to multiple parts of the system. Okay? Like I didn't know myself that if I use, I'm not sure if you have access to Authenticate, مثلا, through the sign-on, through the logon and password of the university. There's a tool called Authenticate for plagiarism detection. So I can use the user ID and password of the university to log on to Authenticate. But I discovered that the synchronization to Authenticate is not immediate. So when I change my password inside the university, the old password is still on the server.
Oh, that's happened to us.
Yes.
The payment.
Sometimes in the yes. So that's why there is the concept of password synchronization. This might be immediate, it might take time, right? And it might not happen at all, which means that you have some parts of the system that has different password from the others. Okay? So once you change your password on MyQU, it gets replicated to most of the servers, but you cannot assume it gets replicated to all. Okay? That's why if the new password doesn't work, try the old one. Okay? We sometimes have to do this. Type. Self-service password reset, that's clear, طبعا, we can reset the password. Federation back. Federation is one of the most important concepts. Federation here talks about sharing your identity information with some external providers. Like we cannot imagine that here we are at QU, we are closed entity and we cannot interact with any other entity outside. Of course we do, right? Someone working in finance, they are allowed to interact with Amazon مثلا, to buy some stuff. Even we are as students and as faculty members, we can log on to Microsoft and get access to OneDrive. MashaAllah, we have 1 terabyte storage, right? صح? And we use the same user ID. So this happens through what? This happens through agreement between QU and Microsoft, based on which QU, they exchange our identity with Microsoft so that we can be identifiable on the Microsoft web server, on the Microsoft servers, right? So this is called identity federation. Identity federation. So our identity information and some of the attributes, okay, might be shared and in some cases might be mapped. Mapped. So you are a student at QU. When you log on to Microsoft, you are a OneDrive user who has access to 1 terabyte of information on OneDrive. So your role as a student gets mapped to a particular role in the Microsoft OneDrive, right? So this is a part of the identity federation. So your identity information can be shared partially or totally. Your attributes can be shared or mapped. This is all can be done through identity federation. So this is the generic management system, identity management system. So you have the principal, who is the user, the main user, who interacts with the identity provider. The identity provider is the one that you register all your information, all your identifiable information, like your name, your QU ID, and all of this, right? But as part of this also, you have some attributes, like what is your credit card number, صح? Maybe what's your مثلا health record, anything like this, health record, okay? What's your EEG data, whatever. Some attributes, or even password can be considered an attribute because password is an attribute that you can change. Or some of these attributes might be controlled by the administrator. Some, like what? Like your role. I can assign you a role as an admin. I can assign you a role as a student or as a faculty member, right? Who does that? The administrator. So some of these attributes are maintained by the administrator, right? When you try to access a service, then your identity provider has to interact with the consumer. But the consumer is the service or is the server, okay? that consumes your identity in order to give you access to that particular service. Okay? So this is a very generic architecture for the identity management. It corresponds one-to-one to this. But in architecture, identity federation, as we said, is very important. Identity federation is, in essence, an extension of identity management to multiple security domains. QU, they can interact with Microsoft, they can interact with suppliers outside. So people in finance or BOD, they are allowed to log on to a particular to Amazon or to any supplier, right? And purchase certain equipment or certain items to a certain limitation, right? So the identity of that employee has to be shared with the other security domain, right? Type. Federated identity management refers to the agreements, standards, and technologies that enable the portability of identities. Portability, so I can move the identity information from one security domain to another, and identity attributes. These identity attributes can also be migrated to the other security domain and can sometimes be mapped to something else. Okay, so you are a user at QU. In Microsoft, you are a OneDrive user. Okay, and so on. ماشي? And entitlements across multiple enterprises. Another key function, مفيش key هنا, مفيش security keys. Another key function of federated identity management is identity mapping, as we said. So we can map some attributes from something to another, okay, on the other security domains. The federated identity management protocol map identities and attributes, okay, of a user in one domain to the requirements of another domain. Like, is there any significance? Microsoft مثلا identifies a role called student. They don't have this, right? But they have مثلا a role as OneDrive user, okay? Microsoft Azure مثلا user, and so on, right? So you can, your role can be mapped. So this is the architecture is this architecture actually defines or it maps to the model that we talked about, one-to-one. So we have the user or the principal. Okay, this user interacts with the identity provider. With the service provider. This service provider is the data consumer. This corresponds to the data consumer on the other side. And this identity provider is the one that you register, and it maintains your identity and attributes. Okay? Your attributes can be controlled partially or fully by the administrator. So this is the exact same thing like the model that we talked about, architecture 4. Okay? So the user first identifies himself or herself to the identity provider. Based on that, he gets some access control and so on. Okay? Part of this, also the identity provider maintains the attributes. Okay? And part of this, the identity provider can interact with the service provider in order to give access to this user to this service, right? Through your role. Okay? So your role as a student, this is Blackboard. Okay? So Blackboard, you can access Blackboard as a student. If you are employee working in finance, you try to access Blackboard, no, you can't. It doesn't make sense. Okay, and so on. So this access control is controlled by the identity provider interacting with the different servers in order to give you access and certain level of access to the different servers. And of course, the administrator controls and maintains your attributes. Okay, they can assign you a role as student. If you, inshallah, graduate مثلا and work as a faculty member, they change your role and so on. ماشي كده? So these are the possible forms for the identity federation. So this is how the identity federation is done. The identity federation can be done in 3 different forms. There is the form of if you have here the workplace.com is the current security domain that you are in. And imagine that we are working in workplace.com. Okay? So you want to access your QLM health insurance. Okay? So here, for us as faculty members, we have some health coverage through some health insurance like QLM or QIC or whatever, right? So we have access credentials that we can log on to these insurance companies and maintain our record and claim and health record and all of this, right? So again, this is done based on certain agreements between this security domain and this security domain, based on which your current security domain can exchange, okay, your identity with this other domain, okay? So this is the federation based on account linking. So they just link both accounts, identifying all the information about you between the two domains. ماشي? As part of this, you can do some role mapping, right? So you at workplace.com, you're an employee, maybe you work in finance ولا حاجة, and then you want to log on to another parts supplier. So you want to مثلا buy something from that website. So in that case, your role will be migrated from or mapped from being an employee in the workplace.com to being a purchaser or a buyer, okay, on this website.
Doctor, in most cases, the user himself doesn't have a say, right? Like he can't say, no, I don't want it to go to that site, or I don't want it to go to this site. Like in QU, our information is in many websites without us basically saying so.
Yeah, of course, this has to be based on some they call it consensus or some. It's part of your contract that once you sign that contract, then you accept implicitly that your identity can be shared. Okay, there are some agreements on a national scale that facilitates the exchange of this identity information from one domain to another. There's a all set of legislations and stuff like that your identity can be shared within certain domains with certain limitations. But it's possible, and based on that, these security domains, they can use these legislations to try to map or federate your identity from one domain to another. The important thing here is that federation based on roles, this means that the role can be migrated or mapped. In many cases, mapped. Okay? So you are an employee, here you are a buyer. ماشي? And the same end user can authenticate himself here or here with different roles. ماشي? By the way, here, one example here happens when you log on مثلا let's say to LinkedIn ولا حاجة زي كده, it tells you, okay, I can identify you from مثلا your Google account. When you say yes, it pulls the information from Google and then it gives you all the information right away, right? Again, this is based on some agreement between مثلا LinkedIn and مثلا Google, based on which all your information can be pulled. Again, you sign. Even if you don't know, but somehow you sign. When you say accept, عارف انت? When you say accept, there is a whole bunch of things that you...
No one reads.
Yes, no one reads طبعا. ماشي كده؟ طيب, this is an interesting scenario where your identity can be chained. Chained معناها ايه؟ يعني you are as an employee, we can log on to your current security domain. From your current security domain, you can actually go to a supplier security domain, but this supplier deals with other suppliers. So your identity can be chained from one security domain to another. So المشكلة it's not only one security domain. can go from one to another to another. فيعني الموضوع كبير. Okay. So this is chained web services. So your identity can be, and your role can be chained from one security domain to another. And for each step, your role might be again mapped or migrated as is or something like this, based on the overall workflow.
What is SOAP message?
SOAP message is the way to exchange your attributes. SOAP message is a standard protocol in web services. Okay, if you look it up, it's a standard. We don't have to know the details about this, but SOAP is a way to exchange your attributes with other web services. ماشي? And web services here is an example of a security domain. Security domain can be a web service, can be email service, can be anything. ماشي? But this scenario is very common in web services because in many cases you log on مثلا to a QU web server مثلا, from which you click مثلا one of the workflows, you have a link, okay, I want to buy some stuff. So all of a sudden you find yourself in another website with another user interface مثلا, you log on مثلا to Amazon ولا أي حاجة زي كده. Amazon, they deal with other suppliers, tons of other suppliers, right? So all of a sudden you find that again your identity, your credit card and everything will have to be again shared or will have to be sent to these other suppliers, right? In order to complete the workflow. Otherwise, I mean, how can we charge you? In which case, how can we give you these items, مثلا? You have a question?
Yeah, the logging in, it's only to your specific server. Yeah, I'm always only logging into
Yes.
Outlook. I'm not logging into other platforms.
Yes, exactly. But your attributes are going to be federated or migrated to these other platforms, and it has to happen this way. Otherwise, how can مثلا you buy some equipment from a certain supplier in the US through the Amazon website? يعني, we have to share مثلا at least مثلا your credit card information. We have to, but again, luckily يعني, or hopefully, this is done through some secure web services. Okay, so you again يعني, implicitly you have to trust so many people that they deal with your identity information and attributes in a secure manner.
Okay. But aren't there usually, like in some services, there's usually a middleman that if I want to purchase something from, the middleman will pay for it and it will take my money without.
اللي هي الباي بال مثلا, زي باي بال مثلا. ممكن. But even then, ما هو أنت you share your information with PayPal.
That's one less service.
Yeah,
Third party.
Okay, so that's the end of chapter 4. So in summary, we talked about user authentication, and we talked about key distribution. So user authentication, we talked about the different means for this, whether we use some kind of a token, whether we use user ID and password, and we talked about the different ways to do this. And then for key distribution, we talked about symmetric cryptography, in which case we talked about Kerberos, and we talked about public cryptography for key distribution, in which case we talked about certificates and the standard اللي هي X.509, this standard. And then we talked about identity management and federated identity management. On time, صح؟